Okay, thank you all for joining me today. So I want to talk about a conversation I think is worth having. Essentially, is uh, the biggest threat to Africa's democracy today. What is the biggest threat to Africa's democracy, Africa's sovereignty, Africa's growth, Africa's development? I am going to, in this video, demonstrate that the biggest threat to Africa isn't poverty. The biggest threat to Africa also isn't climate change, global warming. And I would even argue that the biggest threat to Africa today isn't terrorist organization that is growing in Africa. That isn't the biggest threat. When I mean threat, I'm talking about what has kept Africa poor, what undermines Africa's sovereignty in terms of their government, what has destabilized Africa and continues to destabilize Africa. The biggest threat is U.S. Africa Command, aka AFRICOM. We're going to also discuss what Michael Langley, who is a four-star general and who was recently in the news, what he has been doing recently. He's been busy. He has certainly been busy, and I'm going to demonstrate that in this video. General Michael Langley, who is currently the commander of the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, he's the sixth commander ever since it was established. Recently made headlines, right? When he said and accused Ibrahim Traoré of using the minerals in his country to fund his illegitimate government. This sparked, naturally, the outrage that we saw and the protests, the nationwide protests that undoubtedly happened last week. The protest also was a stance against United States and France involvement in Africa, as well as the recent assassination plot on Ibrahim Traoré's life. Langley, who is what I'm going to focus on in this video, is a vocal point to the undermining of Africa's sovereignty through the AFRICOM program. So let's get into this because we're going to talk about this, and you're going to see what I am talking about. It's all about following the money. I'm going to help you follow the money that leads to AFRICOM. On paper, the AFRICOM program was established to combat and fight global terrorism, to partner with African countries, teach them, provide them military training, and also climate change. This is the official thing that you're going to read about AFRICOM. However, I'm going to demonstrate to you that it's beyond that. It's more than that. AFRICOM was set up in Africa to protect U.S. interests. Here's why I say that. Why Africa? Why was the AFRICOM program established in Africa? Because again, it was established right after 9/11 under George Bush as a way to respond to global terrorism. Africa had nothing to do with 9/11. Africa was not part of any operation to attack the United States during 9/11. As a matter of fact, the nationals, the terrorist nationals, came from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was exempt. The United States didn't go after Saudi Arabia because of their relationship with Saudi, the oil relationship with Saudi. So they didn't go after them. What we heard was talk of WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, from Iraq, Saddam Hussein at the time. The US, through this false propaganda, initiated a war against both Iraq, Saddam Hussein, as well as Afghanistan. This war, which became one of the longest fighting war in US history, which only ended under the Biden administration, cost a lot of money to fund it. The Bush administration needed a way to pay for this. The Bush administration also began the skyrocket of the U.S. national debt. When he inherited the country from Clinton, he inherited a surplus economy. Because of the so-called war against terrorism and the war that was initiated under him in Afghanistan, it cost a lot of money to fund that war. And this is where we began to see the debt, the U.S. racking up the debt that we see right now, which is in trillions, almost $40 trillion, was started under Bush administration because of the war in Iraq. Now, they needed to pay for that. It cost the taxpayers, the United States taxpayers, billions of dollars. That money needed to be paid back. The AFRICOM initiative was established as a way to fund that. Here's what I mean by that. Now, I mentioned earlier on that the AFRICOM is not a for-profit organization. It's a military response against terrorism. Why Africa? The reason why AFRICOM was strategically established in Africa to protect U.S. interests and corporations who have been undermining Africa's resources and exploiting the resources to pay and pull money into the United States to fund the war in Iraq and also in Afghanistan. Yes. So the war in Afghanistan was funded at the expense of Africa's resources. So I'm going to demonstrate that's why AFRICOM was established. They'll tell you all the propaganda that is to fight global terrorism, right? It's not, because I'm going to show you the countries that it was strategically positioned and they've been positioned, which is why when General Michael Langley made headlines, he unintentionally spilled the beans and a lot of people missed it. The AFRICOM program has been working covertly. Most people don't know about it. Most people don't know what they are there for. They've been signing partnership agreements with countries. And so many countries in Africa have no way of knowing what's going on. Their puppet leaders and corrupt leaders have been giving away the minerals of their countries to the United States under the guise of military exchange, military training under this AFRICOM program, which is spearheaded right now by General Michael Langley. Okay. Let me go into let me go in here and give you a visual demonstration so you can see it visually. And then I'm going to pose the question again. Is AFRICOM the single threat to Africa's democracy and Africa's expansion? And you can answer that question for yourself. Okay, let's go in here real quickly. Okay, here is the continent of Africa, a map of the continent of Africa. I am going to focus on this video on this area right here, the West African bloc. Especially, I'm going to focus on the Sahel region. This is the Sahel region right here. Right here. The countries that have been on the news recently in the Sahel region have been Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, because of the coups that occurred in 2021, 2022 under the military generals in those countries. In Mali, we have Assimi Goïta. In Burkina Faso, we have Ibrahim Traoré. And in Niger, we have Abdelhamid Chiani. These are the generals who basically took over their country because they could no longer sit by and watch their country burn under the hands of France and the United States, who were there supposedly providing military support, who have been ripping their countries apart, who have been stealing from their countries. These countries are also one of the 10 poorest countries in Africa. Now, imagine that for a second. Okay? Just think about that for a second. So these countries in the Sahel, the reason for the coup is because these leaders took over there because they saw their puppet presidents who were supposedly democratically elected as Western puppets who basically allow the West to come in and take their resources for their own benefit. So they took over those countries. Ever since that, it has been a problem for both AFRICOM, General Michael Langley, and the United States interest in West Africa. I'm going to focus primarily again on West Africa because this is where AFRICOM has most presence and is heavily present in Africa. The reason for AFRICOM, so-called presence in Africa, again, I'm going to reiterate, is to provide, why? Counter-terrorist support to Africa, which they have failed to produce or provide ever since their presence have been there. Okay, so let's talk about where AFRICOM has its presence. AFRICOM has its presence in Djibouti. When I mean presence, I'm talking about an actual military base. Djibouti is a permanent base for the United States. There are 5,000 U.S. soldiers currently stationed in Djibouti. It is also called the Horn of Africa. It's in Camp Lemonia, which houses a lot of U.S. military soldiers. The reason why this is a strategic position is because it is between the Gulf of Aden as well as the Red Sea. It also is a strategic position because China is also there. China has a base, the only base in Africa, in Djibouti. The reason for U.S. planting a base over there is first because China is there, one. Secondly, because they are there to respond to the terrorist organization in Somalia, Al-Shabaab, as well as ISIS, are in this region. So they're there to ensure that they can respond to any Somalian pirates, which is a huge problem in the Red Sea. This is also why China is there. So that's why they have that huge military base there. Another place that U.S. had a base was in both Niger, Niamey, as well as Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, which is the capital. In 2024, they were expelled out of the countries. Right after the coup in 2021 and 2022, Burkina Faso's president, as well as Niger and Mali, drove both French and U.S. forces out of there. Upwards of 1,100 military soldiers, U.S. personnel, were driven out of these areas. Now, they didn't go home. Okay? They didn't go home. You would think they went home. No, they didn't go home. They got redeployed. A few of them were sent back to, right here, Djibouti, while others were deployed in other parts of what is called as CSL, Cooperative Security Locations. There are quite a few of this in Africa, CSL, and we're going to talk about that. CSL are basically, they're not a brick and mortar U.S. base. They're essentially a gathering of intelligence, U.S. presence in those areas, but gathering of intelligence for the purpose of drone testing, CIA intelligence sharing, those type of spy type of thing, right? That's what the CSL areas are. As a matter of fact, the countries with CSL location, Cote d'Ivoire is one. Cote d'Ivoire signed an agreement in April. Okay, these guys were expelled in 2024. Right after they were expelled out of Burkina Faso and Niger, General Michael Langley went to the president of Cote d'Ivoire, President Alassane, to sign a partnership agreement and to plant a CSL in Cote d'Ivoire as a way to undermine Burkina Faso and the AES. AES is Alliance of the Sahel States, which was established by both Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger as a response to the presence of both the United States and also France in the region. These countries were also part of the ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. They have since broken out and left ECOWAS because they did not see ECOWAS as really helping their countries to fight against terrorist organizations, which come from the north. Okay, so let me give you a quick history on how this whole terrorist organization became and had presence in these areas. A lot of the terrorist groups that you'll find in both Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and Boko Haram. These jihadists, which are Islamic extremists, came from the north. So these things move south. They came from Tunisia and Algeria. They infiltrated Libya after the death of Muammar Gaddafi. So after Muammar Gaddafi was killed because he refused to play ball with the United States and he was establishing what he called the United States of Africa and was trying to make Africa strong, he fought against a lot of these groups. The United States saw that as a threat. So the AFRICOM program began operations with the CIA to depose him. So a lot of propaganda was levied against Muammar Gaddafi because they saw that as an opportunity. If they can take him out, it will undoubtedly cause destabilization in the region, which it has. So the region saw the presence of both Al Qaeda, Boko Haram, and ISIS. So these are the groups, terrorist groups, that a lot of these regions are seeing. Now, how did these groups become terrorist organizations? These groups have long been anti-West. Their religion have pushed back against Western involvement. So they don't like Western education, they don't like Western democracy. So a lot of what is known now as terrorist operations or terrorist groups in those regions have long had a grievance against the West, right? Because of their religion. They don't like Christianity, they don't like anything Western. So these ones have long been against Western involvement in their countries. So these are the ones that are deemed terrorist organizations. They have also become hostile against anyone they see to be a friend of the West. So when any countries, because again, these are all Islamic regions, anyone who seems to toe the line or support or partner with the West, these groups infiltrate those areas and cause mayhem. This is what AFRICOM saw as an opportunity, right, to either expand and provide armed support to a lot of the terrorist organizations so they can kill themselves, right, or also be part of the destabilization. Why? Because they have an interest in those areas. And what are the interests? The mineral resources that these regions are endowed with. Okay. So ECOWAS, not providing the type of support that a lot of these Sahel regions were needing at the time, decided, we're going to be out of that. And they formed the AES, the Alliance of the Sahel States. The Alliance of the Sahel State has become attractive to other ECOWAS members, the likes of Togo, wanting to be part of the Sahel state, as well as Benin, expressing interest to join the AES. This is a problem for both ECOWAS as well as AFRICOM. So when the soldiers were kicked out of these regions, General Michael Langley saw that as an opportunity to redeploy the troops to neighboring areas who were seen by the United States and the CIA as perhaps having a strife against the Sahel region. So Cote d'Ivoire, in April of 2024, same year that they were kicked out, General Michael Langley went and signed the agreement with President Alassane to house a lot of the U.S. military personnel and soldiers in this area because of the tension that Burkina Faso and Cote d'Ivoire had and have had for a while. That sparked a lot of outrage and exacerbated the grievance between Ibrahim Traoré and President Alassane. Now, stay with me here, okay? All right. So I want you to understand how they are moving, how this guy is moving, because General Michael Langley has been busy. As a matter of fact, in November of 2024, he went to 3 countries under the so-called 3D initiative. 3D initiative is basically development, diplomacy, and defense, which is to respond to VEOs, violent extremist organizations, and also to respond to climate change. This is the initiative in which he embarked on the so-called tour he did in November of 2024. These 3 countries were Nigeria, Gabon, and Liberia. So he's trying to get these countries. Again, I want you to see the countries in which they're positioning and trying to position and establish U.S. base in. Because the whole operation is to solve 2 things. AFRICOM is to solve two things. To protect U.S. interests in Africa, which is their main reason there, and also the one on paper, to so-called fight this global terrorism, which is the BS part that we hear. So the agreement with Nigeria, Liberia, and also Gabon is still pending. Now, after he signed the one with Cote d'Ivoire, right, in 2024, the most recent one, which has caused an outrage, is the agreement that he signed with Algeria. Algeria, he went and he signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding with Algeria, to potentially plant a U.S. base, an actual base in Algeria. Now, why Algeria? Algeria is a strategic positioning because Algeria and Mali and President Goitia have been having conflict, largely because of the Tuareg group. The Tuareg group are Algerian nationals who are also living in Mali, who recently, in the last couple of years, have been voicing or attacking Goitia for not having representation for not being politically represented. Mali and the foreign minister of Mali have accused Algeria of actually funding what is now known as the Tuareg movement, which is seen as a terrorist organization in Mali. So, because of the support that Algeria offers to the Tuaregs, it has caused undoubtedly a tension between those two. AFRICOM sees as an opportunity, so goes over there and signs an MOU with them because the goal is to undermine the AES. Now, here's what's interesting about the MOU that is signed with Algeria. Here's why that whole thing stinks. Algeria, historically, have rejected Western involvement in the country. Again, we're talking about these are Islamic areas right now, okay? Think about that. They've historically rejected foreign presence, foreign involvement in their country. As recent as the Trump administration, the first administration, during the Trump administration's first term, with the Abraham Accord Agreement, they rejected that whole thing. They want to be part of it because Algeria has a stance with Palestine. They support the Palestinian cause. So they rejected that. So the idea now that Algeria will be siding or signing an agreement with the West is a hypocrisy. And is one that caused a concern for the Sahel state. Why? Why? Is because, as I mentioned earlier on, Algeria has a gripe with Mali. Do you understand what's going on? So Michael Langley sees that as an opportunity. Let me go over there and sign one with them. Now, there are other countries who have signed the so-called CSL, right, with AFRICOM. Cote d'Ivoire in April, as I mentioned earlier on. Ghana in 2018. Okay. I want you to take a look at where U.S. is positioning itself. Ghana in 2018. Botswana, right here. Now, why do you think Botswana? Because South Africa is a threat. Ever since South Africa has been aligning itself with BRICS, right? South Africa is a potential threat. So that CSL operation here undermines South Africa. They're going to expand that into Namibia, Zimbabwe, Zambia. There's also been an accusation against Langley that there's a military base, which he denied. That there's no military base in Zambia, but that is the future expansion. Now, where else? Kenya is another one. Kenya has a CSL. Where's Kenya? Right here. Kenya right here in the east. Okay, so when you look at AFRICOM, where it positions itself, it's strategically positioned based on the mineral resources that are in this area, as well as the geopolitical strategy for AFRICOM and their whole presence in Africa. Now, why these countries? Why these particular countries? Why did they pick these countries? Let me tell you why they picked these countries. These countries were picked because of their mineral resources. Okay, so let's go down the list here. Okay, so Cote d'Ivoire, because of manganese. Manganese is used in steel production, batteries, electric vehicles. So a lot of the automation that right now is a big thing in the news, the minerals to help power those is manganese, gold, iron ore, and bauxite. Bauxite is primarily used for aluminium, aerospace, engineering. Let's talk about Ghana. Ghana is endowed with gold, bauxite, manganese, diamond. Let's talk about Botswana. Botswana is endowed with diamond, copper. Copper is largely used in renewable energy. Let's talk about Morocco. Morocco is the world's largest producer of phosphates, which are used for agricultural, fertilizer, and food security. Cobalt, which is used in our computers, cell phones, lead and zinc. Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the largest oil producer, natural gas, tin, lead, and zinc. Liberia, iron ore, diamond, gold, bauxite. Gabon. Gabon also went through a coup. Manganese, oil, uranium, which are used for nuclear power plants. You understand this? Okay. Let's talk about Niger. Niger also, uranium, coal, gold. Burkina Faso, gold, manganese, zinc. Mali, gold, phosphates, lithium, which is very important for batteries, energy storage, right? Vehicle batteries. Let's talk about Kenya, titanium. Titanium is used for aerospace engineering. You can kind of see why they're there. Okay, so these are a few countries, right, who have mineral resources that are of great interest to the United States, which is why you're seeing the presence of AFRICOM and the military bases in those countries. Now, I'm going to say this and I'm going to close. In my next video, I'm going to talk about how AES is responding to all of this. I'm also going to talk about why the threat on Ibrahim Traore's life hasn't ended. He's actually in grave danger for reasons that I've talked about and also for what he represents. See, the AES is a direct threat to both ECOWAS as well as AFRICOM in those regions. The AES is trying to expand. The AES, in response to the threats that they have in their countries, and also with the shortage of military training and military personnel in their countries, have enlisted the help of Russia, the Wagner mercenary group, to help them. Now, here's the problem with that, and I'm going to close. Here's the problem. It's not a problem, but here's how it is a problem for the United States. It's history repeating itself. You remember during the time of Patrice Lumumba? Patrice Lumumba was the president of Congo. He was the one who took over the country right after the Belgians were kicked out of the country. The Belgians were in Congo largely because of the robber in Congo and all of the mineral resources in Congo. Patrice Lumumba wanted to nationalize his resources to benefit his country. It was a problem for the Belgians, who wanted to still have a footprint in Congo. So Patrice Lumumba, right after he became the prime minister of Congo, immediately began to get opposition from groups within his own country who were paid by the Belgians and were funded with arms by the Belgians to undermine his administration. He went to the United States for help. They wouldn't help him because the United States was supporting Belgians and Belgium during that whole time. So he went to Moscow, the Soviets. This was a problem because during that time was when the world wars was being fought against the Soviets. The United States deemed him as an enemy combatant and deemed him as a Soviet, right? Which then triggered the CIA to open up an investigation, partner with Belgians as well as the groups in his country, funded them to depose him out of there. The reason why I say is history repeating itself is because Burkina Faso, Mali, as well as Niger enlisting the help of Russia, because what are they supposed to do? Right? They kicked out French and US from their country because these countries were not helping to solve the so-called terrorist fight in their country. Where are they supposed to go? So they've enlisted the help of Russia and China. And so that's a major threat to AFRICOM and the United States. So AFRICOM has been expanding its presence in Africa, expediting that whole process because China has been gaining a lot of footprint. There is a anti-Western sentiment in this region, and is largely growing in Africa, especially in West Africa, while there's a pro-support for Russia and China. So Ibrahim Traore's life, as well as the other general, are in great danger because now he is seen as an ally to who the United States sees as an enemy, Russia and China. So there's an effort to undermine his presence and legitimacy, which is why we saw the assassination plot against him recently, and they're not going to stop. In my next video, I'm going to tell you the threat to AFRICOM. I'm going to tell you the one thing that threatens AFRICOM in this region. It is not the military capability in Africa. It is not Russia or China. I'm going to give you in my next video where I'm going to talk about AES response to all of this. I'm going to tell you the number one threat to AFRICOM, which threatens their position in that region. But until then, please like the video, share the content, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all next time.
Nu vill jag kunna ge tillbaka allt jag inte kunna ge förut. Det finns ingen annan där som kan stå här by my side, oh why. Sättet du rör på det får mig att dö för det baby. För de här yardis, de vill ju bara dra ner oss. Men du är fett och vanlig. Och det jag lägger all min tid och jag vill ha det. Du får mig känna safety. Det kan nog leda baby.